In the shadows of our everyday lives, there are things we can't see. Unseen eyes watching, unknown forces lurking, and terrifying secrets waiting to be uncovered. Tonight, we dive into the heart of fear with 3 chilling tales of horror. Stories where the ordinary meets the unthinkable, and where the line between reality and nightmare is all but erased. Prepare yourself for a journey into the unknown. This is only the beginning. It started with a single text. Laura Mitchell glanced at her phone as it buzzed on the table, interrupting her quiet evening. She reached for it, expecting another mundane message from a colleague or a spam notification. But when she unlocked the screen, her heart skipped a beat. The text was from an unknown number. No name, no signature, just a photo. Her own photo. It was a picture of her standing in front of her apartment, taken earlier that day. Laura furrowed her brow, trying to remember if she'd noticed anyone around. She hadn't. The street had been empty, the day ordinary. She brushed it off as a prank, some creep with too much time on their hands, and blocked the number. But the unease lingered. The next morning, Laura's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a picture of her at the local cafe, sitting by the window, sipping her coffee, and reading the morning news. The angle was perfect, the timing impeccable. Laura remembered that exact moment. She'd felt completely alone, lost in thought. Yet someone had been watching, unseen, capturing her in that private instant. Her fingers trembled as she typed a response, her professionalism as a journalist clashing with the growing knot of dread in her stomach. "Who is this? What do you want?" she sent, half expecting no reply. Seconds later, the phone buzzed again. Another photo. This time, it was from inside her apartment. Laura stared in disbelief, her breath catching in her throat. The image showed her asleep in bed, the covers pulled up to her chin. The angle suggested the photo had been taken from the corner of the room, as if someone had stood there, watching her while she slept. Panic surged through her as she scanned her apartment, her eyes darting from corner to corner, searching for any sign of intrusion. The doors were locked, the windows secure. But someone had been here, someone who knew how to slip in and out without a trace. Laura's mind raced. She was an investigative journalist, used to uncovering secrets, not being the subject of someone else's twisted game. The thought of reporting it to the police crossed her mind, but what could she tell them? A few creepy photos, no real evidence of a break-in. Would they even take her seriously? Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. This time, it wasn't a photo. It was a message. "I see you." Laura's blood ran cold. She glanced around her apartment again, but nothing seemed out of place. How was this happening? Who was doing this? Her hands shook as she typed another message, her fear starting to overtake her calm facade. "Leave me alone. I'm calling the police." No response came. For the rest of the day, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every time she looked out the window, she expected to see a shadowy figure lurking outside. Every creak of the floorboards made her jump, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. The messages stopped for a few days, and Laura began to think that maybe it had just been a cruel prank, someone trying to scare her. But the sense of unease never left her. She started avoiding her favorite places, staying away from windows, keeping her phone on silent to avoid the nerve-wracking buzz of another message. But just as she was beginning to relax, to convince herself that it was over, the phone buzzed again. Laura's heart dropped as she picked it up. This time, the photo showed her standing in the grocery store, picking out vegetables. She remembered that moment clearly. She had been alone, or so she'd thought. The message that accompanied the photo was chilling in its simplicity. "I'm closer than you think." Laura's paranoia intensified. She installed new locks on her doors, set up a security system, and even changed her phone number. but nothing stopped the messages. Each time they were from a different number, impossible to trace. Each time the photos were more invasive, more intimate, and each time the messages grew more threatening. The final straw came one night as Laura was working late at her desk. She had buried herself in work, trying to distract herself from the fear that had become her constant companion. Her phone buzzed, and with a sense of dread, she looked at the screen. This time, the photo was different. It was a picture of her, sitting at her desk, taken from behind. But what terrified her wasn't the angle. It was the figure standing in the background. A shadowy figure, indistinct, but undeniably there, watching her. Laura spun around in her chair, but her apartment was empty. The doors were locked, the windows shut. Yet someone had been there, standing just feet away from her. Her phone buzzed again. A single word appeared on the screen. "Run!" Without thinking, Laura grabbed her keys and fled the apartment. She didn't know where she was going. She just needed to get away, to put as much distance between herself and the unseen stalker as possible. But as she sped down the quiet streets of Hamanskral, a horrifying realization dawned on her. The messages, the photos, they weren't just a threat. They were a trap designed to push her into making a mistake. Her phone buzzed again, and this time the message was a video. Hands shaking, Laura opened it. The video showed her own apartment, filmed from outside. The camera panned across the front door, where a note had been taped. The video cut off abruptly, leaving Laura with a sinking feeling in her stomach. She turned the car around and sped back to her apartment, fear driving her faster than rational thought. When she arrived, she cautiously approached the front door. The note was still there, just as the video had shown. With trembling hands, Laura peeled the note off the door. The message was simple, handwritten in neat, precise letters. "Welcome home, Laura. I've been waiting." Laura's world spun as she realized the horrifying truth. The stalker wasn't just watching her from a distance. They had been inside her apartment all along. They knew her every move, her every fear, and now they were closer than ever. She stumbled back to her car, her mind racing. There was no safe place, no way to escape the invisible eyes that watched her every move. As she sat in her car, heart pounding, she knew she had only one option left. She had to confront the stalker. She had to take back control of her life before it was too late. But as she stepped out of the car, her phone buzzed one last time. The message was simple, chilling. "It's too late, Laura." She looked up, and there, in the shadows, she saw him, Asher Corbin, a man she had once trusted, now a ghost in the night, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying mixture of obsession and triumph. In that moment, Laura knew the truth. The game was over, and she had lost. James Reynolds couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It was a nagging sensation that had started a few weeks ago, subtle at first, but growing more insistent with each passing day. As he sat in his sleek, minimalist office on the 23rd floor of a Manhattan high-rise, the city skyline sprawling out before him, James felt an inexplicable sense of unease. He was a man who thrived on control, both in his career as a renowned architect and in his meticulously organized personal life. But lately, that control had been slipping through his fingers. It began with the photos. The first one appeared as a text message on his phone one crisp Monday morning. James had been sipping his coffee, mentally preparing for a day filled with meetings, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, expecting a work-related notification, but instead found a photo attached to a message from an unknown number. The photo was of him standing at the window of his office just moments before. The angle was unsettling, as if the shot had been taken from directly outside the glass. Impossible given the height of his building. James frowned, scanning the room for any sign of a prank. He even checked the window, looking for some hidden camera or drone, but found nothing. Dismissing it as a weird glitch or an overly elaborate joke, he deleted the message and tried to focus on his work. But the photos kept coming. Each day brought a new image. Some were taken at his office, others at the gym where he worked out, and a few from his own home, his private sanctuary where no one else had access. The photos were disturbingly intimate, capturing him in unguarded moments, eating breakfast, working late at night, and even lounging on his couch in his pajamas. The most disturbing image, however, was one that arrived on a rainy evening as he lay in bed, exhausted from a long day. The photo showed him asleep, the blankets half tossed aside, his face peaceful and vulnerable. The angle suggested the picture had been taken from the foot of his bed. Jams bolted upright, his heart pounding. He scrambled out of bed, checking every lock and window in his upscale apartment. He found nothing out of place, no sign of forced entry. His apartment was a fortress, secure high above the bustling streets below. But someone, somehow, had been inside. As the days turned into weeks, the photos became more invasive, more threatening. Then came the morning when James's life began to unravel completely. He awoke to find his wife, Evelyn, sitting at the edge of the bed, her face pale and drawn. In her hand was her phone, the screen glowing with a series of messages. "Who is she, James?" Evelyn's voice trembled with a mix of hurt and anger. James's blood ran cold as he took the phone from her. The photos were of him and another woman, intimate, undeniable. His affair, which he had taken great pains to keep hidden, was now laid bare. The images showed him with his lover, Charlotte, in moments that were meant to be private. They had been taken in places where no one else should have been. His office, Charlotte's apartment, even a secluded spot in Central Park. The photos were accompanied by a message. "Your secret is out." James's carefully constructed world collapsed in that moment. Evelyn left, taking their children with her, her trust in him shattered. His reputation at work was tarnished as rumors spread, whispers of his indiscretions tainting his professional image. But the worst was yet to come. Charlotte stopped responding to his calls and texts, and James, desperate to explain, to somehow fix the mess his life had become, decided to visit her apartment. The building was old but well maintained, a stark contrast to the sleek modernity of his own. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He tried the handle, and to his surprise, the door creaked open. The apartment was eerily silent, the air thick with an oppressive stillness. As James stepped inside, a sense of dread washed over him. He called out Charlotte's name, but there was no response. His heart pounded in his chest as he moved through the apartment, his footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. He found her in the bedroom, lying on the bed, her face serene, almost peaceful. But she wasn't sleeping. The sight of her lifeless body hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, a strangled cry escaping his lips. Charlotte was dead, cold, her skin pale and waxy, as if she had been that way for hours. On the bedside table, her phone lay next to a photograph. James picked it up with trembling hands. The photo was of him standing over Charlotte's bed, his face twisted in an expression of despair. But he hadn't been there, hadn't taken the photo, yet there it was, clear as day. He dropped the phone, panic clawing at his throat. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in on him, the air thick and suffocating. He needed to get out, to get away, but his legs felt like lead. As he stumbled toward the door, his own phone buzzed in his pocket. He fumbled to pull it out, his hands slick with sweat. The message was from the same unknown number, the one that had been sending him the photos. It contained only 2 words: "You're next." James fled the apartment, his mind racing. The events of the past weeks replayed in his head. Each photo, each violation of his privacy, each unraveling thread of his life. He had to know who was behind this, who was tormenting him, and why. He returned to his own apartment, place that no longer felt like home. He dug into the building's history, combing through records, searching for any clue, any connection that could explain the nightmare he was living. What he found chilled him to the bone. The apartment building had a dark past. Decades ago, it had been the site of a tragic accident. A young woman, Eleanor Hastings, had fallen to her death from the roof under mysterious circumstances. Her death had been ruled an accident, but rumors persisted that it was something more, a suicide or, worse, a murder. Since then, there had been a series of unexplained deaths in the building, each one more mysterious than the last. And each tenant who had lived in James's apartment had met a similar fate, haunted by strange occurrences, driven to madness or worse. As James delved deeper into the history, he discovered something even more disturbing. The photos, the ones he had been receiving, were identical to those taken of previous tenants, right before their deaths. The connection was undeniable. The apartment was cursed, haunted by a malevolent force that latched onto its occupants, driving them to their doom. But why him? Why now? The answer came to him in a moment of terrifying clarity. The apartment had chosen him because of his sins, his affair, his lies, his betrayal. It was punishing him, stripping away everything he held dear, exposing his darkest secrets. The photos were a warning, a prelude to the inevitable. James knew he had to leave, to escape before it was too late. But deep down, he knew there was no escape. The curse was relentless, and it would not let him go. As he packed his bags, ready to flee the city, his phone buzzed one last time. He didn't want to look, but he couldn't resist. The message was a photo. It showed him standing on the roof of his building, looking out over the edge. But it wasn't the present him. It was a vision of what was to come. The final image showed him in midair, falling, just like Eleanor Hastings all those years ago. James dropped the phone, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't want to die, didn't want to end like the others. But the pull was irresistible, the compulsion to go to the roof overpowering. It was as if something else had taken control, guiding him up the stairs to the very edge of the building. He stood at the edge, the wind whipping around him, the city spread out below. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange sense of calm. This was his fate, his punishment, and there was no escaping it. As James stepped off the ledge, the last thing he saw was a flash. The camera capturing his final moment, just as it had done for all the others before him. Rose Jacobs never noticed the eyes that followed her every move. The University of Johannesburg was a sprawling, historic campus, its buildings steeped in the weight of centuries-old traditions. The Gothic-style architecture, with its looming towers and shadowed archways, had always filled Rose with a sense of awe. But lately, that awe had been tainted by a creeping unease, a feeling that someone or something was watching her. It started innocuously enough. Rose, a diligent and somewhat introverted student majoring in history, had always been one to follow a routine. Her days were meticulously planned. Morning classes, study sessions in the library, afternoons in the cafe, and evenings spent in the solitude of her dormitory. It was a life she found comfort in, a life that offered her the peace and quiet she craved. But one morning, as she was heading to her first class, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a reminder or a message from a classmate. Instead, she found a text from an unknown number. It contained a single attachment, a photo, her photo. The image showed her sitting in the library, surrounded by books. It was a candid shot taken from a high angle, as though from the balcony above. Rose frowned, trying to recall if she had noticed anyone near her that day. But she remembered nothing unusual, no one hovering nearby. She shrugged it off, assuming it was a prank. Maybe one of her friends testing out a new camera or playing a joke on her. But the next day, she received another photo. This time it was of her sitting in the campus cafe, sipping on her usual order, a vanilla latte. The angle was odd, taken from the side as though the photographer had been hiding behind one of the columns. Again, she hadn't noticed anyone paying her any particular attention. As the days passed, the photos kept coming. They captured her in different locations across campus, studying in the library, walking between classes, even sitting alone in her dorm room. Each photo was accompanied by a brief, cryptic message. Are you alone? Who's watching you? Do you see them? Rose's initial annoyance turned to unease. She started paying more attention to her surroundings, her eyes darting around whenever she received a new photo. But she never saw anyone out of the ordinary, never noticed anyone holding a camera or following her. The campus, once a place of comfort and familiarity, began to feel menacing, its dark corners and shadowed alcoves hiding unseen eyes. One evening, as she sat in her dorm room trying to concentrate on her studies, her phone buzzed again. She hesitated before picking it up, her heart pounding in her chest. This time, the message was different. It wasn't just a photo, it was a video. She clicked on the attachment, her breath catching in her throat. The video showed her room, the same room she was sitting in at that very moment. The camera panned slowly across the space, capturing every detail. The bed, the desk, the window. It was like watching a live feed, except the video had been recorded earlier, judging by the dim light outside. Then the camera focused on the closet door. The video zoomed in slowly as though something or someone was behind it. The screen went black just as the door began to creak open. Rose's blood ran cold. She leapt from her chair, backing away from the closet. Her mind raced. How had someone recorded this? Was there a hidden camera in her room? And more terrifyingly, was someone inside her closet right now? Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. Another message, this one just a single word. Look. Rose stared at the screen, her heart pounding in her ears. She had to know. She had to see for herself. Summoning every ounce of courage, she approached the closet, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. She yanked the door open, expecting to find something hiding inside. But it was empty. Just her clothes hanging neatly, her shoes lined up on the floor. There was no one there. She collapsed onto her bed, her head spinning. Was this all some elaborate prank? Who would go to such lengths to scare her? And why? As she sat there trying to make sense of it all, she noticed something out of the corner of her eye, something small and metallic glinting from behind one of the closet shelves. She reached for it and pulled it out. It was a tiny camera, no bigger than a button, with a blinking red light. Someone had been watching her. Someone had planted this in her room, invading her privacy, tracking her every move. She felt sick to her stomach, the reality of the situation hitting her like a ton of bricks. She was being stalked, observed like some kind of lab rat, and whoever was behind it was getting bolder, more brazen. Determined to find answers, Rose began to investigate. She started with the university's history, poring over old records and archives. The more she dug, the more she uncovered stories of students who had experienced similar things. Cryptic messages, unexplained photos, a feeling of being watched. Most of these accounts were dismissed as urban legends, stories meant to scare first-year students. But there was a pattern, a thread that connected them all. The stories all mentioned a secret society known only as the Unseen. According to the legends, this society had existed for centuries, its members drawn from the most elite and powerful families. Their purpose was to observe and manipulate, to control the lives of unsuspecting students for their own amusement or darker purposes. The society was rumored to use advanced technology, hidden cameras, and psychological manipulation to achieve their goals. Some said they were behind many of the campus's unexplained tragedies, suicides, disappearances, accidents that were never fully explained. The more Rose learned, the more terrified she became. The thought of being a pawn in some twisted game, of being watched and manipulated by people she couldn't see or understand, was almost too much to bear. But she couldn't just sit back and let it happen. She had to find out who was behind it and stop them. Her investigation led her to an old, forgotten building on the edge of campus, one that had been abandoned for years. According to the records, it had once been the headquarters of the Unseen, though most people believed it was just a rumor. But Rose wasn't so sure. She decided to go there to see for herself if the building held any clues. She waited until nightfall when the campus was quiet and made her way to the old building. It was a dark, imposing structure, its windows boarded up, the doors chained shut. But Rose had come prepared. She found a way in through a broken window and carefully made her way inside. The interior was cold and musty, the air thick with dust. The floors creaked under her feet as she explored, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The building seemed deserted, but there was a strange feeling in the air, a sense of something watching her, following her every step. She found an old staircase leading down to the basement. As she descended, the air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around her. At the bottom, she found a heavy door, its surface scarred with age. It was slightly ajar, and beyond it, she could see a faint light. Rose pushed the door open and stepped into the room beyond. It was a large circular chamber, the walls lined with old books and strange ancient artifacts. In the center of the room was a table, and on it a collection of photographs. Rose's heart skipped a beat as she recognized herself in the images, sitting in class, studying in the library, walking alone at night. These were the same photos she had been receiving, but there were more, dozens more, documenting every moment of her life over the past few weeks. She picked up one of the photos, her hands trembling. On the back, someone had written a single word: watched. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her, and the room was plunged into darkness. Rose's flashlight flickered and then went out, leaving her in complete blackness. She felt a rush of cold air, and in the darkness, she heard the faint sound of whispers. "Welcome, Rose," a voice said, low and mocking. "We've been expecting you." Panic surged through her as she realized she wasn't alone. She backed away, her hands groping for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls, as if they were coming from all around her. "You've been chosen," the voice continued. "The Unseen have always been watching, and now you're one of us." Rose's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. The stories, the legends, they were all true. The Unseen were real, and they had been watching her, manipulating her, pushing her towards this moment. But she wasn't going to let them win. She wouldn't be their pawn, their victim. With a surge of adrenaline, Rose threw herself against the door, pounding on it with all her strength. The whispers grew louder, mocking her, taunting her, but she didn't stop. She kept pounding, kept fighting, until finally the door gave way, and she stumbled out into the hallway. She ran, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't stop until she was back on the main campus, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of student life. But even then, the fear didn't leave her. She knew she wasn't safe. She knew they were still watching, still waiting. But she also knew she wouldn't stop fighting. She would find a way to expose them, to bring their twisted game to an end. And she would do it before they claimed another victim.
In the end, we can only wonder. How well do we truly know the world around us? What secrets hide in the places we feel safest? And what happens when those secrets come to light? Thank you for joining us on this journey into the unknown. Remember, the real horror begins when the screen goes dark. Stay vigilant and stay curious. Until next time, beware of the unseen.